Have a drink of water if you're hungover. Come on in. Come to the front. You're late for my talk. Come to the front. Well, in China, everybody, the police have just got new Google glasses at their China Google, and they use face recognition to find out whether you're a dissident or not. But the good news is that people in Fujian University and Alibaba have already developed a baseball cap which will project infrared over your face so that they can't recognize who you are after all. Isn't that wonderful? Human ingenuity trumps IT repression. And that's really my theme today, how brilliant human beings are compared with electrons. But the promise of this device, folks, of course, is not only that you can block the people who are trying to find out who you are, but you can also do simulation, so that you can at the same time be Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. So I find this just wonderful, and it's a tribute to the ingenuity of the Chinese. Now that's all very well, but we have to recognize what's happening in IT now, because the agenda has changed. Just in the last 6 months to a year, IT, which used to be wonderful, especially when it got Obama elected, is now described as terrible in every regard. It's going to destroy all your jobs, it's going to manipulate the ignorant, and of course, with mobile phones looked at every 12 minutes, it's addictive. But in fact, that sort of oscillation between loving IT to bits and hating IT to bits forgets that if you just take the question of work, there are many more other changes that are not technologically developed, which are to do with what Joseph kindly complimented me about, the social dimension of IT and of work and of life. And if you look at what's happening in the office, in your own work, there are all these important sociological changes that very few people talk about, that have very little to do with IT. And this brings me to my first friendly suggestion to you, should any of you pick up a pen and take any notes, which I know you don't like to do. And that is that if you look at the office, for example, even before Me Too, people were starting to worry about open plan offices as a site for sexual harassment. Nothing to do with IT, nothing to do with social media and Me Too, preceded Me Too, but it underlines a very important thing, which is that you're all brilliant, distinguished engineers. Improve your sociology. Understand society even better than you do already. Because actually that's the determining factor. It's what we do, rather than what IT does, that determines the future. So that's one thing. And when we're thinking about sociology, we need to remember that the crisis of legitimacy that IT faces, the tech clash, is part of a wider crisis of legitimacy of elites in Europe, in America, and even in China. So if you look at all of the people who've lost credibility in the past few years, not only in Britain but in Germany and in America as well, brands, IT, the conventional wisdom is subject to this legitimacy crisis. And one of the things reinforcing that, especially in the world of IT, is how many hacks there have been in the past few years. But it's going to go a lot further, because Alec Baldwin could be Donald Trump at the next election. You've heard of fake news. We're now moving into a zone called fake videos, where you won't even know whether the person giving you an election address really is that person. So stand by for that. That's going to make IT look even less legitimate in some ways, if it's the conveyor more than ever before, visually, of fake news. So that's all, by the way, introduces one of the themes, the social dimension of the future. And I also want to warn you against, now that you've adopted agility, using it just as a buzzword. I'm all behind you on it, but let's have a look at a few buzzwords that Fujitsu would do well to avoid in the next year. Bad concepts, as our German friends have it. One of them is always going on about the accelerating rate of change. I'll tell you, if I hear another speech begin with the accelerating rate of change, I'll know there's one thing that doesn't change, It's that stupid opening. Well, that didn't get much of a laugh, but if you look at the accelerated rate of change, it is moving quite fast in robots, but you're comparing these numbers against 200 million unemployed around the world. So you've got a fast increase, but actually a very low penetration. There's no exponential increase in battery power. Very hard to get figures on battery power, but generally the progress is slow and linear. What is really growing, though, is the exponential use of the phrase exponential. Can you stop doing that? Don't ever do it, right? Don't ever do that, right? Have a look at the maths. What's the difference between exponential growth, polynomial growth, linear growth? By the way, all of them end in infinity. So if you want to say Fujitsu's going through exponential growth, right? Take a look at the year 3000. Is that really realistic? Okay, well actually, if you look at the original paper that inspired all this stuff, Gordon Moore's paper in the 60s about Moore's law, very interesting, he doesn't use the word law anywhere through the paper. Right? He is not talking about a law of exponential growth. So be very cautious about that phrase. What all of that exponential stuff comes from is an old English parson called Thomas Malthus. I won't dwell on him. So let's avoid that, can we, for the future, before we come to discussing agility. Here's another one of the ratings agencies. The technology sector today holds the most cash among non-financial companies, followed by healthcare, pharmaceuticals, consumer products and energy. It's really great to hear from Moody's that healthcare, energy, consumer products is not a technological sector. The only technology around is IT. Right? That's the technology sector. Everybody else not doing any technology. None. Stop using that phrase, tech, which the Wall Street Journal uses to describe everything, when in fact they're only describing IT. There's plenty of other kinds of tech for scooping up the plastic in the oceans by a Dutchman, for scooping up the dirty air in Beijing, for scooping up the dirty air and turning it into carbon rings. You know, how many of you, especially the Germans, Joe, how many of you want to live in a zero carbon world? Hands up. Oh, yeah, there's a name just scratching your head, just as well, because you're 18% carbon. If you did vote for zero carbon, you weren't voting for suicide. So there's all these other kinds of technologies, like sucking the bad air out of Berlin, and making a graphene dress that will keep you cooler in a morning like this, or making a graphene dress that will say, I fancy you on the catwalk, please come up and say hello, because of the graphics display that graphene allows. So be very careful how you use the word tech. And it took me a long time to find this one that wasn't a woman in a swimsuit, but another phrase you should never use in Fujitsu after this talk is seamless. Seamless. In 2,000 years, Italian tailors have never made a seamless suit. Right? They've never done it. So don't say to your client, we've got a seamless solution here. No, that's not going to work. That man is taking notes, or you're talking to a friend. That's very good. And there's another one as well. Mark Prensky, a Canadian, in other words, an American who wants to be a European, he wrote this paper all about digital natives. None of you have read it. Please read it. Before you use the phrase digital natives and say, my son understands everything about mobile and all of that stuff. Does he understand computer science, your son? Has he ever read a book from cover to cover on computer science? If you read the paper, actually it's not a bad paper. But it's one thing to say that kids' brains are a bit plastic and they're probably growing up with keyboards the way that you and I didn't. It's quite another to say kids love and understand IT. If you look at this chart, you don't have to look at it in detail, you'll find that the 18 to 25s in orange are much more scared of IT than you and me. So they don't know as much about it as is suggested by the phrase digital native, and they're much more scared about what's happening in IT, even though robots are progressing rather slowly in terms of their penetration. Don't use the phrase, please, digital native. Tech savvy millennials. No, wipe it out from Fujitsu. Don't let me catch anybody saying any of that. I want to come around their door. And the final one we've got to watch out for is wellness. You know, call me old-fashioned, but I thought the purpose of an office was to do work and create wealth. I now understand it's a hospital. You know, we've got to spend our whole time doing this and have a meeting with Joe. Go, hi Joe, how are you today? You know, no, stop it. So I hope you'll avoid these concepts. And while we're on it, we might remind ourselves, just in the spirit of interrogation, that customer loyalty is now 28 years old. 28 years old. Do we, I mean, in a world of illegitimacy, shouldn't we be talking more about customer disloyalty, customer skepticism, customer promiscuousness with credit cards and all of those things? I mean, this is the cover of a consumer magazine just this January. That would underline how we've got to question concepts like customer loyalty, personalization. This is from 1996, 22 years old as a concept. And then there's our old friend B. Joseph Pine II. Get that right now, everybody. Not the third, the second, 21 years old on the experience economy. Now we could discuss all of this. I'll tell you one thing. One very clever website called Hitmonk, its version of customer experience in the airline business, you'll see it's got a special tab for agony. That's what it believes the customer experience is, and I agree, in airlines nowadays. So let's take a critical attitude to some of these old phrases, especially the first few that I outlined. And I hope Joseph and all of you will have a big struggle, not just a linguistic struggle, but one for clearer concepts when you're considering some of this stuff, these buzzwords. All right, now let's have a quick look at the history, which immediately sounds boring, but is actually quite revealing. Why are you, and more people, talking about agility now? If you look at the end of the Cold War, it's exactly at that period that the whole concept emerges, first of all, in US manufacturing. They didn't have it in the old Cold War, but now the whole of the world was opened up for capitalism. Then it became more important to be agile, to move into Eastern Europe, to move into Russia if you could, and all of these things. And the first major book about it, which goes further than American manufacturing, is this one. And roughly what they say, reflecting the times, is their definition of agility is about opening new markets, right? The ability to get in fast, given the prospects that were opening up. And it's exactly after that time, around 2001, that also we see in software, which you know about much better than me, the development of the Agile Manifesto, putting into IT some of what the management theorists have said before. Remember also, at the same time as the manifesto was published, China joined the World Trade Organization, and the West was very much salivating at the opportunities available there. What they didn't notice is what the Indians noticed, which is that in fact, China was building what India called a string of pearls, all the way from China through Malaysia and so on, Sri Lanka, up to the port of Gadar in Pakistan, to try to expand its influence. The West was largely concerned with expanding Western influence. It missed that. And in this period, a few books were published. You don't have to read them, thank God. At least this didn't say tech-savvy millennials. But if you take Jean Ross, in 2006 or so, she summarized the new thinking about agility. And you can see already that, especially after 9/11, security, reliability become more important. And also you have a reflection of really what was happening on the world economy, more and more mergers and acquisitions. So her focus, Ross, at this period was very much about partners, about new business models, and adjusting to this new, more open, more Chinese kind of world. One of the best writers on technology and management is Yves Doze, who's at INSEAD and is French. And he introduced something also, in addition to the previous book, and this is around 2008, same time as the financial crisis. To his credit, he stressed the human dimension of agility. And one of the good things about a conference like this is you're having a high-quality dialogue about what agility should be. And you want to have an open dialogue where people are allowed to criticize other people for their concepts and so on. Need fluid resources, including human resources with a lowercase h, lowercase r, to do all of that. Now, I got some news for you. You're all terrible at human resources because you're engineers. Second of all, you're going to face more of that sociological dimension in your engineering practice. But the good news is, you're all terrible at human resources, but you're not as terrible as the human resources department. So, get serious about that. No disrespect, you understand. And then, well, it's good that they underline this. Now, just after the financial crisis, you see this more human dimension to agility showing up in 2009, where it's all about, craftsmanship, community of professionals, productive partnership. So don't forget the human dimension of it, the sociological dimension. That's very important. Now, around 2011, a rather good but not totally great company came up with this discussion on agility, very banal, escalating expectations. New companies, there was something in there, and guess what? Our old friend, the velocity of change, right? Demanding more agility. Well, we dealt with that. But what we can say, the background was, in 2011, Obama's pivot to China. Now, the whole idea of a pivot is all reinforcing the attractions of the word agility. So this little section is all about the attractions of it, but can we clarify? Can we understand where it came from? Because some of the people who are pivoting to Asia at the moment don't look quite so good today. But that was part of the background. And then more recent books since that, 2014, John Cotter, very useful for you, this book. Sorry, 2012, but the book, I think that's the article, the book is 2014. In the post-9/11 environment, and with ISIS and so on, he's saying that agility is dodging threats. You can see that coloration. But his main contribution was to say, in theory, what you are doing with a conference like this in practice, with the distinguished engineers generally, and that is to have a parallel network separate to the hierarchy that's able to get things done and to move things along very quickly without the old management 360-degree appraisals and all of that stuff that we saw earlier. And this is a little diagram he does. You've got a separate sort of apparatus there that's informal, that promotes leaders, that looks for leaders, that is based on volunteering, and that's quite a good recipe for agility. I think you're doing it with FDEs. You could probably do more of it and make it more of a 7-day, well, 5 days a week, 24-hour thing, not just events and publications and all the other things. Maybe you're doing all of that. So what he's saying is the network needs to have a sense of urgency about the big opportunities. A nice optimistic note after all these rather scary times. And also very important, that second network must foster leaders, as I said. Now, so therefore, if we're answering the first question then, agile software certainly contributed to the attractions of the word agility. Startups that didn't have the usual silos seemed to make it very attractive as well. Everybody was worried about the pace of change, the enormous uncertainty, which of course is much worse today than the Cuban Missile Crisis, Dunkirk, and anything like that. We can be certain of one thing, how uncertain the world is. I'm a bit bored by all of that. I'm 90% confident that tomorrow will be Friday. It could go either way, but well, you missed that one. There are all these fears of basically what's happening in geopolitics, right? There's the IT background, agile software, there's the management background, and then there's the sort of geopolitical background. And that's not for nothing, because it's at just this time that China is building not only the string of pearls, which is an Indian phrase, but also the Belt and Road Initiative, which is separate from fooling around all the way that the Pearls were doing. And that is also contributing to the sense that we need to be supple. We need to be able to adjust our plans very quickly. And it's all fine, except for the fact that it's not just radicals such as me, but even McKinsey, the Jesuits of capitalism, can say, well, wait a minute, we've got too much quarterly capitalism. We're too much controlled by the stock market performance every 3 months. That is the background. It's not always positive, which means that before we rush and say, agility, far out, I love it, right? Is it an excuse for a rather short-term, reactive, rather thin sense of strategy and of the future? Because as I say, it's not just me saying that there is this sort of glib character to a lot of what we're doing at the moment. It's actually the CEO of McKinsey. So what we have to do is remember that, yes, agility, but be careful. Promiscuous use of the term can obscure short-termism and low investment. You know, you're so busy being flexible that you're not making the long-term plans and the long-term investments that are required. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, if my laser pointer will work, but I don't think it will, the amount of investment as a proportion of GDP in the United States done in IT has dramatically declined since 2001. We not only got a general business investment crisis, except in China, where they're probably overdoing it. We have it in India, we have it in America and Europe, especially in Britain. Investment crisis. We're not even investing in IT the way we used to. We used to do 4.5% in America at the dot-com boom of GDP, and now we're down to under 4%. Might not sound a lot, but that's a significant reduction in our society's commitment to IT. All right, so that was the history. Where are we going now? Well, first of all, we've got to clarify just how you pronounce it. Now, Joseph asked me to do this, and now maybe I'm wrong, and you don't need to debate this longer than a microsecond. But as I understand it, it's agile from Joseph, agile from the Americans, and agile from the Greeks. You get that Churchillian delivery. And then you've got azure, you've got Azure, and maybe I'm wrong, Joseph. You've got Azure, like the Americans, and then you've got Azure, like the British. Well, I prefer Azure, like the Italians, or Azure, like the French. So can we clarify all of that? Otherwise, they're on a different hymn sheet. Now, that's a trivial problem, but there's a bigger problem, right? Agility, like digital transformation, is often very different from cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, you can't be tolerant. Agility, you have to be tolerant of mistake. That's one thing. But there's a wider sort of contradiction, right? There's you as engineers, which is all great, you know, and you're in your seamless engineering system. And then, of course, somebody a bit different, management, that isn't very interested in the software but does want to cut costs. You want time to make those agile mistakes. Management says, no, we've got to be agile. We've got to be quick, we've got to cut costs. So try to resolve that contradiction. Because interpretations of agile differ between engineers and software people and management people. But thinking more broadly about what it should mean for us today and tomorrow, one or two things. If you look at the cash hoarders, and GE is one of the biggest ones, and it's in some trouble nowadays, you might think that GE, big cash hoard, it's lumbering, it's a lumbering giant. If you're big, you can't be quick. But I want to say that just because you've got a big cash hoard doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be agile. On the other hand, just because you're big doesn't mean that you have to be a lumbering giant. If you look 160 million years ago, I love to do, you'll see this rather large dinosaur was able to imitate John Wayne and move at 30 kilometers an hour. So Fujitsu still has the possibility of being agile, and General Electric, that you might think had all this cash to move around, do anything that it wants, not looking so good anymore. So financial agility isn't the same as real agility. Bigger needn't mean slower. That's reassuring for you and many of your customers. And we think in the English way about dictionary definition, then maybe there's no problem with agility. It's all about kind of this stuff, sinuousness, reach to new markets, dexterity, nimbleness. So we're thinking this, which is all very well, but there's something else, which is that if you're in athletics where you're very agile, you also have to work out what your competitors are doing, what your opponents are doing. And so if you're Mo Farah, you're always looking at other people like that, working out their psychology, getting insight. So when we go back to Samuel Johnson, the quality of being able to move quick and be nimble and to react quick is also to do with sussing out your opponents and anticipating things. So it's not just physical speed, which is what most of us think with agility. It's also about being mentally quick, alert, acute, discriminating, and anticipating the future, not just reacting to it. So it's our human quality, the ability to read a situation in a way that robots often cannot, that is a very important aspect, not just of athletic agility, but of agility in general. So it's about brains, it's about anticipation, and therefore it must also be about integrating tactics and strategy. Tactics the short term, strategy the long term, but it's less vulgar than that. Who was it who first systematized the distinction between tactics and strategy? I'll give you a clue. It's one for you, Joseph. Who's this? Come on, you Germans. There's a clue. Go on, Karl von Clausewitz. He wrote Zum Kriege, on war. And he distinguished between tactics as winning the battle, strategy as winning the war. And therefore your anticipation of both the short term and the long term is very important. So you need the speed, you need the brains, and you need something else. And this is not a plea for me, because I know you'll never have me back. But I do think that you need to improve your forecasting. Not just your technology forecasting, like IDC, Gartner, Forrester, and all the people saying exponential every other word, but your social forecasting, your forecasting of the competition, your forecasting indeed of what's happening in world trade and geopolitics. Now it's for a separate seminar for me to take you through, the ABCs of forecasting. But I'm going to illustrate the last one, synthesize tendencies and counter-tendencies, in just a minute. So this is my fourth recommendation: improve your forecasting skills. And it's quite easy to do if you take my favorites. They're all there, and that's just the consumer side. It's quite easy to see what other forecasters are saying, and that's it, really. That's the beginning. You collect more forecasts, you suspect more forecasts. And if I can do it, you can certainly do it. All right. Now, just giving an illustration of this and thinking about trade and geopolitics, Joseph asked me to say, I wrote Joseph my little sort of synopsis. I never got a reply, so I imagined it was all right. But if you don't like the talk, he's the man to see. And he said, well, listen, we got, 13,000 people doing software in India. We got 9,000 or 7,000 in Poland. Where's that all going, James? At least that's how I remember you. So I thought I'd look at that. And the very simple things, right? It looks a bit complicated. The big reality is American outbound investment. It's much bigger than inbound, right? The blue is generally bigger than the red there. So that's worth remembering. America remains the big multinational abroad. And if you're thinking about reshoring, which is bringing some of that back, which is what the Donald would like, I'm here to tell you that in fact inbound FDI into the United States, which is the red one, is actually much bigger than reshoring. There's a lot of talk about reshoring with 3D printing and all of this stuff and robots. But it's not really happening. A little bit. If you look at the jobs numbers, which is not quite the same as the investment numbers, you can see that the US has been reshoring from China, pulling back from its early 21st century commitment. But the number of jobs involved, given that Trump and Obama are seeing about 250,000 new jobs every month, the number of jobs coming from reshoring, relatively modest. And the big change, really, is that China has now joined Germany in investment into the United States. One of the reasons that Trump is now so nervous about empowering the Committee for Foreign Investment in the US, as he fears. So the picture is, folks, it's America going out, it's China going out. Obviously, a lot of people have been going to China. And in terms of nearshoring, there is a bit of nearshoring to Mexico and Canada, but again, the job numbers are pretty modest. So that's worth bearing in mind. Now, we've got a European report all about that I especially avoided you having to read. Thank you very much. It's got the usual 2x2 bullshit matrix. If you can follow that, you're doing better than me, I'm telling you, ins and outs and so on. But the upshot is that there are some tendencies towards reshoring, right? Which is, you go out there in China, for example, and you get burned. You thought it was all about low wages. The wages have risen, and anyway, there are lots of complicating factors. Right? You thought it was going to be no protectionism, tankers wouldn't cost very much, IT would always work, and instead it's all rather costly, the output isn't great, and you have to spend a lot of time doing coordination. So why not bring it back? And then you find it's quite hard to do all the technology things in Indonesia, for example, that you would like to. And it's also hard to tap all of Indonesia's resources, the skills, the raw materials if you're in manufacturing and so on. And then it all gets a bit complex, so why not bring it back? And one of the things that comes into all of this is what your feelings are about high technology. If you think you can substitute for a lot of workers abroad by being highly automated at home, then that's roughly what Nike is thinking about doing. So it used to be blamed for exploiting workers in the third world. Now it's being blamed for maybe withdrawing from the third world because it wants to reshore with the help of robotics. So it's a bit uncertain what will happen depending on the pace of change in technology. But all of those things tend to favor bringing it back. But what's forgotten in all of this? What's forgotten in all of this is that the assassination of Victoria Marinova in Bulgaria just earlier this week or so, and all the other abductions, assassinations, tariffs, and all the other things, mean that there's another reason that you might want to bring it back, and that is geopolitical instability. You know, you don't want to be in Saudi Arabia right now. I needn't explore the point too much. You'd rather be in America or Japan or Britain. And furthermore, you've got the fact that if you don't come back in America, somebody's going to have a go at you. Somebody rather important, although we might all laugh at him, right? And that's why he's so angry with Apple for being abroad and all of this stuff. So there's some counter tendencies to reshoring, however, that we need to think of, which is the FDI outbound is still growing, and it's growing in services. That's what Amazon is all about, and 7-Eleven overseas and all of that. It's all the tax tricks you can play with globalization. So why would you bring things back when you're under more surveillance at home? And also, very importantly, procurement has got a lot more sophisticated. You can now cut down the number of suppliers that you have, like Nike has, and therefore you can still operate worldwide, don't have to bring it all back. So you've got more professional and more agile handling of supply chain, and you've also got the fact that in Britain, for example, R&D by Fujitsu is a big deal. It's not all done in Japan, it's done here, and it's also done in India and China. not just with Fujitsu. So the globalization of R&D is one of the most interesting aspects of the big dynamic towards globalization. But just looking at those counter tendencies to reshoring, the old story of capital export, we need to remember there's a much more structural fact here, which was isolated as early as 1971, which is around the time of the energy crisis and the first recession. Going abroad was a necessity, according to the doyen of multinational studies, Raymond Vernon. So what I'm saying is that the tendency to go abroad and to have to be agile as a result of that is deeply seated for the past 50 years or so in the economy and is a response to recession. So reshoring is really no match for that fundamental drive to go overseas. So if you take Nike, they can reshore a bit, and they're doing a lot in nearshoring with Mexico. But they're not going to eliminate 200,000 workers in Vietnam or 140,000 in Indonesia anytime soon. No domestic production is going to make up for that, no matter if it's very, very automated. So there's some other reasons to consider a synthesis of both the tendency to reshore under pressure from the dollar, but it goes beyond the dollar. And there is some reshoring in automotive, because he's been very tough on car companies, Ford, for example. It can be reshored if it's call centres. That's been going on with British Telecom for a few years now. But there are plenty of people still going abroad, going into China in important new sectors like electric vehicles. And also, it's not just an excuse to show this slide, just for equality reasons. I'm going to show that slide. Harley-Davidson is going more abroad since Europe imposed tariffs in response to Trump's tariff. So Harley-Davidson said, well, bye-bye, Donald, we're going to set up in Europe. He's very angry about that. So, you know, back and forthing it, the predominant trend is outbound. There can be and is some reshoring. What does it all mean for you? The good news is you're going to hang on to your jobs for a bit longer. And I'm just reading the FT this morning because of some tax wrinkle with Japan. Panasonic may not be alone in quitting Britain because of Brexit, because Japan has said, look, we'll not be so nasty to you on taxes if you do leave Britain. As it happens, I'm sure the right in Britain, the right of the Tory party, will cave in to a Brexit in name only, Rhino, in which case I think Fujitsu's subsidiaries in Britain are safe, they will remain there, and apart from Panasonic, many other Japanese companies, and Nissan and all the rest, are likely to stay in Britain, and they're certainly likely to stay in Europe. So that's good news. What does it mean for you? If you're already lost with my trade, investment, and geopolitical picture, okay, now's the time to study it more, because that's what your clients are doing, it's what Fujitsu is doing. Can you track it? We said the sociological dimension. There's also the economic and the geopolitical dimension to do with trade and foreign direct investment. All right, well, 2 concluding sections and then I'm done. I hope I'm keeping time. One of the things that's increased the attraction to agility is what's been happening in your workplace. And this is a new report from a property company, CBRE, and it's all about the agile workplace. How do we get there? Well, this was one of the departing points. It's all history now. But when it came, the idea of actually doing business in a cafe, on site, in the workplace, was all about agility. It was the coffee machine moment. It was all about the chance encounter and how productive that could be. Been going 20 years now. Once mobile networks started working better inside the office, the possibility of the agile office grew. We had all of this historic stuff. And by 2011, of course, the infatuation with tech-savvy digital native millennials had kicked in enough for them all to be the new rulers of the office. You know, I don't want to come in at 9 o'clock every morning. I want a holiday when I want a holiday. And that was all agile too. And then everybody else started agreeing with it, according to Cisco. You know, they all wanted an agile workplace. And there was another thing that was happening, which is miniaturization. Miniaturization of IT in the workplace made it possible to have more rooms for playing snooker, more rooms for having coffee, more rooms to, be a bit agile and all of that, because you didn't have the clunky mainframes. Instead, you had flat screens and all of that. Finally, most recently, you've got the rise of the gig economy, and the number of contingent workers has grown compared with the core full-time workers. So all of that has made the agile office a bit of an imperative. And if you look at the plans that CBRE described about what firms are going to do today in blue and in 3 years in orange, the general tendency is to move towards unassigned workspace. That's when 25% or more of your seats could be for anybody, right? What's called hot desking, hundreds of years ago. Hot bunking. Well, let's not go any further in that direction. I'm glad you're getting some of the jokes. Obviously, all these property consultants want to make a meal out of it. But there is something in it, right? And what is broadly happening is that IT is going to be, in the next 3 years, more integrated with the fabric of the workplace, right? In terms of the temperature we're in, the lighting we're in, who's where, maintenance, asset management, sensors, and wearables are up, virtual reality is down, because we can all Skype, and it's hardly VR. So what does this mean for you? Well, one of the things, if you want scrums and sprints and all that agile lean stuff, you need some time and space for concentration. Joseph, where is he? He's gone. Well, if you're facing an aging workforce, which we are in Germany and Japan, noise, and that mobile phone that's ringing there, is a very important impediment to agile work. In the future, we're going to solve some of these problems. We're going to get a Google Earth for sound. It will reveal just how noisy it is at Twickenham Stadium, at Heathrow Airport, and inside your office. And one of the things that we can look forward to is automotive technologies, where you can each listen to your own music, being applied to the open plan office so that we can concentrate more. The important thing in Fujitsu's offices is not to start from the property people, the architects, and all of those guys, the facilities managers, to start from you. The office has to adapt to you, not you to the office. So I think you should have a look at your real estate base. It's time to make friends with the property department. And that way you can organize for agility physically, directly. Not just indulging the people who want to play snooker, but making for a more productive environment. So I'm at the end. I just want to say, Joseph asked me to look at this. Now he's gone. Why do they fail? I looked through the literature for you. No need to do that. And most of it's fairly familiar about new product development. You didn't get stakeholder buy-in at the front of the project. You failed to maintain the AI sufficiently. You didn't get the right data. The most important thing is the whole term and the whole bullshit around AI, which is it's totally wonderful, it's here now, and it's cleverer than us. No. In certain situations, it's cleverer than us. It's not going to give a speech like mine in a hurry. But the main problem with it is all of that. Not with you, because you're at the sharp end, but with clients, Somebody said to Tom Peters a long time ago, oh, I like what you said. It was Ford, I think. He said after he published In Search of Excellence in 1984, he said, Mr. Peters, I love what you said about corporate culture. I need a brand new one by Monday. And that's roughly, what we see with AI. It just won't do. How will an important dimension, since I attacked the customer experience mantra, how will it change? Well, it reinforces the whole point of the talk, which is as people get better at customer service, you've got more back office stuff being integrated into the process. You've got more complaints and suggestions going around the whole organization. And the key decisions and issues of judgment are going to still be made by human beings, not by machines. Machines do not have an ethical sense. They don't have a sense of lack of legitimacy and all of that. You and I do, because we're real people. So that's worth remembering, that our faculty, our sense of judgment, is something aesthetically, spiritually, politically, personally, all of these things, the machines cannot emulate. So that's to sum up what I've said. Get better at the people business. Appoint not a language police, but somebody to weed out the buzzword. Clarify what you mean by agility and AI, or Joseph's phrase, intelligence amplified, much better, IA. Get that economics and geopolitics into your bloodstream, because it's what clients are worried about. Adapt the offices to the teams, not the other way around. And increase your tolerance, your willingness to engage in an open dialogue to clarify agility, at the same time as you still make judgment, the thing that makes us human. Let any idiot speak. Be tolerant of that. At the same time, judge the idiot and the clever people. So the time is up. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience.